So welcome, everyone. It's a beautiful day, and I want to thank all of you for sharing this sunny day with us. Um, so happy to see everybody. I also want to welcome my aunt, Ayako Nomura Machida, who is the only living daughter of Mizuko. She will be celebrating her 99th birthday this year. So she isn't quite on Zoom now, but maybe we'll have an opportunity at the end to say hi to her. I am Hatsumi Kathy Crystal, and I have the privilege of introducing two speakers. Both spent their childhood in Los Angeles, West LA, and South Central Los Angeles. Our moderator, she's over here, Jill Shiraki, is the education coordinator here at J-Sei. And I have to say that she is instrumental in keeping us elders connected to the world in a wonderful way. We have classes here in art, ikebana, let's see, music. What else? Language, yes. Everything. She is instrumental in keeping us involved and happy in a group. So we are actually a family, and we are happy to be with one another. Keeps us engaged, and we get better and better in our art, in our writing, in everything, music, exercise. So Jill's efforts in in creating community among the seniors is truly priceless, and we really treasure her. She herself is a writer and a contributor to the Nichibei Times. She's written and researched on the issue of preserving California's Japantowns, and is also a very excellent book reviewer. The author, Art Art Nomura is my brother, and I have and I have known him since he was born. That makes me his big sister, One-san, if you will, right? And while growing up, he rarely listened to me, and we fought a lot. But we stopped when he grew taller than me. As adults, we have grown closer, and I have admired his boundless creativity, his awesome attitude, and his gentle wit and charm, which has attracted many friends and admirers the world over worldwide. So let's take this time now to hear from the two of them.
Thank you, Hatsumi, Kathy, Crystal. We love having Kathy and her energy, and I see some of her actually classmates here who take watercolor with her and Nihongo, right? So it's been wonderful to have you part of the family, and occasionally have Eric as well. So shout out to Eric. And it's wonderful to invite your family in. So yes, I am a new fan of Art Nomura and his boundless creativity. So let me tell you a little bit about Art. This is his short bio. Art Nomura is engrossed with the innovative uses of media, including trans and 360-degree media, which I don't know what that means, but he has worked as a painter, sculptor, potter, filmmaker, writer, and new media artist since 1968. Several of his works have themes directly connected to the Asian American experience. His work has screened on PBS, cable, and in festivals, galleries, museums, and universities worldwide. Nomura has taught media production and writing since 1981. From 1981 to 1985, he co-managed the video annex of the Long Beach Museum of Art and taught media production at Cal State LA, Cal State Long Beach, and Pitzer College. From 1985 to 1990, he directed and taught video art production in the studio art department at the University of California, Irvine. He has taught film and video production, editing, screenwriting, TV studio production, computer animation, and film history in Portugal, Italy, Germany, New Zealand, and the United States. In 2003, Nomura received a Fulbright Research Scholar Grant to live in Japan and shoot his documentary, Finding Home. Born in Manzanar Concentration Camp, California during World War II, he is Professor Emeritus in Film and TV Production at the School of Film and Television at Loyola Marymount University. He continues to teach occasional courses and fostering intercultural dialogue at LMU between writing, gardening, traveling, bicycling, qigong, Pilates, social activism, design, construction, and art making activities. So welcome, Art. We have a lot to talk about.
First of all, I want to thank Jill, for that wonderful introduction. And I guess I have to thank my sister too. So thank you for that. And thank you all for coming out today and spending your afternoon with us. I appreciate it. Listening to that biography is it's a bit humbling. I think to myself, I did all that. Wait a minute. And I'm at this point in my life where I can remember last week, but let's say going back last year, now you're asking a little bit. And then, yeah, as the other things that are mentioned that have happened 20, 30, 40 years ago, then it doesn't seem quite real. But yet I did those things and it's all part of me. So here I am. So
tell us a little bit about your media arts and how that started. Were you always an artist?
Well, I always liked to make things, even when I was a little kid. And it started out with like making sand castles and tunnels and all that kind of stuff. I would spend hours in the sandbox doing that kind of stuff. And then it graduated to drawing. I would draw endlessly, all kinds of things. And I was so curious and I was so interested in doing it that there was no conscious thought. I just did it. And my parents were not artists. My mother was a homemaker and my father was a trucker. They had limited education. My father went only to the 8th grade in school. I could see that he was a bright man, but he was also not a very refined person. And my mother, on the other hand, introduced me to classical music on record players. And, I got that immersion as well. So it was a kind of a curious, well-rounded childhood. The greatest thing is, though, that they didn't get in my face. They didn't get into my life. They basically let me do whatever I wanted to do. And that was good because I just wandered all over the place. I made friends with people in the neighborhood. We lived in a very multicultural neighborhood, and I would go to someone's house that was a retiree, let's say old Polish couple. They would see me and then they'd invite me in, and I would sit on their sofa and eat cookies and drink milk. And I would spend the afternoon kind of hanging out. And I did this with a lot of people in the neighborhood. So I knew more people in the neighborhood than my parents did. And I think that really benefited me because I think I got an appreciation for all the different ways people could be. So the question was inspired me. Well, like a lot of Asian Americans, it was not easy to decide to become an artist because that was not the expectation, not so much from my parents, but from society in general. And so, you know, if you're going to study law or you're going to be a doctor, those were probably the prime occupations if you could go to school. And that wasn't a given either. So I was not really interested in those things. I think my dad was interested in it because it'd make him look good. You know, my son, the lawyer, that kind of thing. So anyway, I went on and I had a lot of adventures in life. I went in the service.
Well, you were going to be a cowboy at one time.
Oh, that's, yeah. One of my fancies was being a cowboy when I grew up. And I had a whole outfit when I was 5 years old. I wore chaps and a 6-gun and a cowboy hat. And I basically wore that all the time. And you say, oh, that's really cute. But when I was 14, I still wanted to be a cowboy. All right. So the problem was, as I got to be more aware of the greater world, I never saw a cowboy, an Asian cowboy, or a cowboy with glasses. And so I was disabused of that notion, you know. So anyway, yeah, and you, while I'm talking about that, if you are interested in some of my previous work, I'm not going to talk about various video projects, everything I worked on, but if you go to artnomura.com, I have a website that is chock full of stuff, and you can look at your leisure. So anyway, no.
So many of us in the Asian American community know about visual communications in Los Angeles, and tell us how you got involved with VC and what you did.
Well, you know, I went through a whole series of jobs. I finally got a degree in art in college, but that was not a very practical degree, really. I mean, I should have been a lawyer, right? But I had this art degree, and then I said, well, what am I going to do with it? So I said, I better get a teaching degree, a credential, and I got that. I ended up teaching at my alma mater, and you know, realize I'm only in my mid-20s and not that much older than my students. And the school was kind of the same as it was. It was a little bit rougher, and I was teaching ceramics, making ceramics and stuff. And the problem was the art department in those days was a dumping ground for delinquent kids. And so every day I would get a new batch of students that were stand sullenly on the wall and, you know, try saying something to me, that kind of attitude. And I did this for a while, and I said, this is not my dream. And so I quit. And it was not good. You know, I was trying to make it as an artist, as a potter. Not good. I'm not making I had 2 little kids. It was not good. I had to go to the depths of things, according to my father, and actually get food stamps. And to him, this was a huge shame, right? You can't get food stamps. I said, well, I'm not going to get the money from you. All right. So anyway, long story short, I finally decided I needed to get a job. So I went to the county and I got a job as a welfare worker because I had a college degree, right? And it was giving out food stamps the next week. So life is really cuckoo, right? And there was a lot of different kind of episodes. I'm not going to bore you with all of them, but I finally did get to a place where to visual communications, and I thought, okay, I want to learn filmmaking. I got to get back into the creative world somehow. And filmmaking seemed like a way that you could do this. You could be creative and you could make money. So I went there as a volunteer. I'd saved some money up, and this was operated by a group of Japanese and Chinese filmmakers, Chinese and Japanese American filmmakers, usually around third generation. And they became my mentors. And I had done a lot of photography and everything just on my own. So I know how the dark room worked and all that kind of stuff. And so I got involved with them. And I'll tell you one story from there. I know I'm going on and on, Jill, but this is an interesting story. Is that, and it turns back to the book, the musical story, is in our home, like in many Japanese American homes, they never talked about the concentration camps that they had been in. And I'm sure I see some nodding heads out there that you've experienced the same thing when you're growing up and your parents were, your parents were in one of those camps. When they said camps to me, I thought summer camp. Oh, that must have been fun, right? But that's usually about as far as they would go. And I didn't know anything about the camps really. And here I am, I don't know, a young man, and volunteered for this film organization. And we decided to film in 1981 the Redress and Reparation Committee that had been going around the country, seeing whether or not the Japanese and Japanese Americans were actually due such relief. And they were taking testimony from various people. When they came to Los Angeles, they went to the county courthouse, and my friends at Visual Communications and we decided we have to document this somehow, because I think it's historic, all right? We didn't know. I mean, we're all 20-something. We don't know anything. So anyway, we go over there with our big, giant video camera and a video deck, and we start recording the proceedings. And I'm taking my turn at the camera, and I'm shooting the panel talk and everything. I said, well, I better get some cutaway shots. I need some shots of the audience. And the room is full of Japanese Americans, right? And so I taking close-ups of this person, that person. And gotten about a third way through the audience, and then is my mother on the screen. I said, what the hell? I almost dropped the camera, because she had never talked about it to me. We had never heard about it. And my sister, I think, can verify this. We never really heard about it. And yet she was there because she could feel like maybe a grave injustice would be partially righted. And that really struck me. Mm-hmm. And I think that really set me on the path. I got to do things that have Japanese American themes and Asian American themes, because there's so many people that have experienced this kind of thing. And then it expanded to people of all races. Everyone, I mean, whether you're a woman or whether you're gay or, it just cuts across all lines. But at that time, I thought, I should be doing something here with my media, because media is very powerful. So that was a visual communication experience.
Mm-hmm. And your first documentary, did you want to tell us about that?
Well, Eric Crystal, who is back there somewhere, and we've been brother-in-laws for, 60 years? I mean, a long time. And I know that, he is a noted anthropologist, and I don't know if you knew this, but West Oakland was a repository for the Yumien, which is a hill tribe from Laos. And they chose the wrong side in the Vietnam War. They decided to support the United States, and the United States lost. And so those Yumien, they lost too. They were like wanted men in that area. So I'm saying this facetiously, but the US flew the tribes people from Laos to the United States. They said, well, where are we going to put them? Well, there's some vacant buildings in West Oakland. And at that time, West Oakland was really a pit. And but that's where a lot of them went. And they were literally a fish out of water because they didn't have a written language. They couldn't speak even the native mainstream Laotian. They had their own language, and they dressed a certain way. And blah. I said, these are fascinating people. I should do something about that. And I was a fledgling filmmaker. I said, okay. I bought a video camera and went up there, and I said, well, geez, who should I ask? I said, well, I'll ask Eric. And Eric knows about Southeast Asia. He's an expert in it. And so we collaborated, and I made a half-hour video about these people. And that was the start of my video, making.
And for the Fulbright scholarship, you went to Japan for a number of months. What year was that?
I was there for about almost 5 months.
Okay.
Yeah. I would have liked to have been there longer, but school called. And anyway, so the reason I went there is I could tell you a huge story about this, but anyway, Fulbright has the grace to sponsor people to go overseas if you don't know about it. And most of the people that go over teach, right? And but I didn't want to teach. I was teaching. I just said, I don't want to do that. I want to do some research. I said, well, okay, what are you going to research? I said, well, better think of something here. I'm fascinated by Japanese Americans who have lived in the United States and decide to go to Japan to live. I thought, well, what's the thing? I can understand other people from countries that are war-torn and all that, and moving and coming to the States, but I didn't get why Japanese Americans were going. I could kind of get it, but I really didn't get it. So I wanted to explore that. So I made this documentary called Finding Home, which is about an hour-long documentary, and I ended up interviewing people. And along the way, the State Department, who has some relationship to Fulbright, they started calling me and they said, well, can you give this lecture to these people? They're interested in what a filmmaker has to say. And I said, oh, okay. He says, we'll pay for your hotel, your meals. Okay, I'll go. So I went, and there would be these audiences of 100 people, Japanese people, right? And I had to have a translator because my Japanese is really poor. And I did what I'm doing now. I'm just kind of winging it, right? But anyway, they seemed to eat it up. At least they were too polite to boo. But anyway, I talked to them about creativity and the need to be yourself when you're being creative. And this really caught their attention. And especially the young people were really listening to every single word. I don't know what the translator was saying because I couldn't understand them, right? But it seemed to be getting through. And then after the lecture was over, probably half of the people stayed, and they crowded around and they wanted to know more about this thing. How can you be yourself? I mean, does society let you, and all this kind of stuff? And I thought, well, I tried to answer their questions, but I still believe that. I think that there is an innate creativity in all of us that for whatever reason it's being curtailed, right? Either through our culture, through societal norms, whatever, all right? And you don't do the thing that you really, really, really want to do. A lot of us don't do that. We don't have the opportunity to do that. We don't have the choice to do that. At least we feel that way. Okay, and I think I was hitting that chord. So that's what that's about.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
That's great. So Art has a wonderful website, artnomura.com, and you can take a look at some of the excerpts from some of the projects he's talking about. So you can see an excerpt on finding home, and it's 5 minutes. I wanted to show it, but we decided that you can look at it at your leisure. And we want to focus on this project, which is Mizuko True Spirit. And it's memoir, but it's also like a creative narrative form. It's so interesting. It's a great read. I just read it again. And I love it. So maybe tell us a little bit about this project, how this book project came about.
Okay. Well, I'm a little embarrassed to say that it took me years and decades to start writing this book. And I guess I have to give some credit to my sister. All right. But, you know, I had my own life going and I thought, okay. But then I started to remember things about Obachan Nomura. So I thought, okay, I did go down there and she lived at this point in her life, she lived in a farmhouse in San Isidro, right? And go down there and I don't know, I was a little kid. But the thing was that I was surrounded by women growing up, okay? I had two sisters, a grandmother, a mother, father who was never home, and then I went down there and then there was a grandmother, a mother, two sisters, no guys. It was just me, right? And so I go down there and you would think, well, that's not a very good situation, but it was wonderful because they treated me like a little prince, you know? And my grandmother did, and I thought, wow, this is really very nice. And not only that, my grandmother was one of the few people that was physically affectionate. She would hug me, right? And not just a little perfunctory thing, but really squeeze you. Felt so good. My parents never did that. No one did that. No one in the Japanese that I knew, they never did that, right? And then when she laughed, it was with her whole body. It's not it was this big belly laugh, right? And I thought, oh, this is really cool. I like this. And she never changed that through her life. And then the third thing is that she would tell these wonderful stories. My Japanese was better then, so I could understand more. And she would tell these stories, but never mind if you missed a detail the first time, because she'd tell it again, right? And I heard some of these stories a lot of times, but they were great. And they were humorous and they were very heartfelt. And even though they were of her life, and you'd think, oh, that's not going to be that interesting. Her life was really interesting. She did such interesting things with her life. And I thought, oh gosh, I got to write a book about this. As I got older, I got to do something about this. I got to make a documentary about it. Well, you think that people are going to live forever. Of course they don't, right? I mean, you think you're going to have the opportunity to talk to someone later. No, that later doesn't come. And even though I knew my grandmother for 40 years of my life, and I was a filmmaker for the last 10, I didn't do anything until I started watching other Sansei filmmakers because there's a bunch of them that became educated and then became filmmakers themselves, and they made pretty nice films. I thought, okay, out of respect for this person and I'm curiosity, I'm going to go watch this film. And I watched this film, and inevitably, it was about their grandmother, the documentaries. And so I'd look at the film and I go, wow, that film was really, really well done, well shot, well edited, well paced and, organized. And so, and I thought, but boy, that old lady was really boring, and I thought of my own grandmother and I thought, come on, you're talking about grandmother, here's the grandmother. And so I said, oh man, I should have started the documentary then, right? I still didn't do it because, life gets other things in your way. So anyway, I'm getting off track here. Anyway, that's how I kind of got started on the project. Yeah.
Okay. And how did you decide on the format? So first it was an ebook or was
Oh, okay. So instead of doing the documentary like everyone else had done, I had the bright idea of creating an ebook that had interactive images and videos and all this kind of stuff in it. And I actually produced it. It took me about 3 years to produce it. And I used the iPad platform and something called ebook, which Apple, put out with great fanfare. And it was a wonderful, wonderful piece of software. And so the ebook had movies in it, had moving images, had animation, blah, 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 plus the narrative. Unfortunately, Apple decided to stop supporting that particular piece of software, right? And when I showed it to people at that time, they said, oh man, that's really cool. But I've never seen anything like it. As if that was the criteria, which I've learned in years since, that is a criteria. We have to recognize what you're doing before we're going to financially support it, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, this is kind of the life of an artist. The artist is supposed to be thinking ahead and thinking unconventionally. That's what I do. But I was not fitting in there. So enter my sister. She says, there's a lot of people that don't have iPads and Macs that would want to read what you did. And I said, well, that means I have to rewrite and format it and everything. And she says, well, I'll help you. Yeah. So
maybe we should show the PowerPoint. Should we do that?
let's do that.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Let's show the
I put together a small PowerPoint and that'll show you some of the images from the book and also
a little bit about your grandmother's story.
Yeah. Now, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by reading the actual captions and titles that are on here. You can do that yourself, all right? But I will narrate them. So this is a slideshow. It's about a dozen slides. This is one of the very few pictures of my grandmother, Mizuko. And that's my father standing next to her. He's 4 years old, and my uncle Jiro, who's 1 year old, on her lap. The only reason she consented to this photo was because she needed a passport to go back to Japan, all right? Otherwise, she felt like she was too ungainly and unattractive to be in any photo. So this is a very rare photo. She only had 6 photos of her, I think, that existed before World War II, right? And this was in 1920-ish, around there, okay? So the next one is
Point it that way.
Mm. Oh, I'm supposed to be pointing this way, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, this is come on. Some of you might be familiar with the Japanese family crest. And they had the Takahashis, where my grandmother came from, were a very well-established old Japanese family. In fact, I've looked at records that go back over 300 years to Kyoto with their family tree. So they were very well-established and very wealthy. So they got their own crest like this, and I know that crests are sort of common thing now in Japan. Everybody seems to have them. A lot of them have been manufactured to the family's specifications, which is fine for me. But this is one of the original crests that was created, and this is for her family. Now, in her early years, my grandmother was a very thoughtful person, and she loved animals. Of course, there are no images of her because we're talking about 1900 here. And they lived on a big estate, and they had a gardener who had a dog that she got friendly with, and she would help the gardener do some of his chores. And this is an artist depiction. I hired an artist to illustrate some things, and this is one of the scenes that he depicted. Now, this one is an image of my great-grandfather. This is Mizuko's father in this area called Onorimura, which is south of Hiroshima, in the Hiroshima area. And he's wearing this very ornate kind of Chinese silk outfit that is suitable for a magistrate. And even though you'll have to read the book to hear the details, but even though his family was quite wealthy, there became an incident where they lost the family wealth, but they did not lose the family stature. So he continued on as a school principal or something, but a very small percentage of the former wealth that his family once had. This is a photo of my grandfather, who I never met. He died in 1930. He was, by all counts, a brilliant person, a philanderer, a gambler, a ne'er-do-well, and a sort of a charismatic character, right? And he was 16 years Mizuko's senior when they got married, right? And he had secrets that he did not tell her, that she found out later. I decided to include this slide in here. This is a family tree, and you can see Mizuko has, and Kazuichi, who is my grandfather's name, had 6 kids of their own. And my father, Takuma, or as he called himself, Henry, was the oldest of those children. But unbeknownst to Mizuko, Kazuichi had been married before and had a wife that died of cancer. And she had 2 kids with him, two daughters. Mizuko didn't know this when they got married. And she only found these girls later on when they were older. And then she sort of rescued them and brought them back to America. And they lived with her for a while. So I thought I would include that family tree as a way of explaining that there's very many complicated relationships among my relatives. I won't bore you with them all, but it's not uncommon for people to remarry and so forth. This is the ship, the Mexico Maru, which is a steamship. She came to United States to Tacoma, Washington from Kobe, Japan. And it took them 2.5 weeks to make that journey. And um, there were not a huge number of Japanese on that boat. And I'm going to read you a little excerpt from when they got off the boat. This is a rather complicated but original drawing from Deer Lodge, Montana. Now, this is a rail yard in Deer Lodge. Now, why am I showing this? Well, this is probably one of the most dramatic parts of her whole life is that in order to get a job there, because her husband, like I said, is not a really hard worker. And I don't know if he was sick or not, but he wasn't working and the family needed money. So she dressed up in men's clothing, and she was tall for a Japanese woman. She was like almost 5'6" of that era. And she went down to the employment office and presented her. She had a low voice also. So she was able to convince the station employer that she was a guy. And he asked her if she had ever worked on a railroad before, and she honestly said, "No, I haven't." She says, "Okay, we're going to put you in the sand house," which is that one little area circled there. The sand house is this funny little building that has a heater in there. I don't know what you call an oven. And the purpose of the oven is to bake sand so it's extremely dry. And then once the sand is dry, they put it in to this opening on the railway locomotives when they come up, and then the sand is then transferred down to in front of the drive wheels for the locomotive, because they were in Montana and they also often had freezing tracks. So hers was a very important job. It was a backbreaking job because you had to shovel sand all day. Out of the bins and into the furnace, out of the furnace into the locomotive. Sometimes you had to climb up a 25-foot tower in order to get it into a feeder. She did this for a year and a half, just as a man. She was discovered that by the foreman of the company that when she was nursing a baby during her lunch break. And he says, "What are you doing? You can't do that." I mean, and then he says that you're a woman. And then he says, "You're fired." One of her stepdaughters, a very quick-witted 11-year-old, had brought the daughter out to her to get it fed. And so she jumped in right away. And she says, "Well, I hear there's a mutiny going on among your men, that they hate the cooking here. They hate the food. And if you don't do something about it, you're going to lose some of them." And the guy said, "Well," he said, my mom can cook. She's a really good cook." And I thought, God, what does it take to have that kind of quick-wittedness about you? Anyway, the foreman paused and said, well, he didn't really want to fire her. She was one of his best workers, right? So he said, "Okay, we'll give her a try." Well, he did more than give her a try. She cooked for that crew of 150 men, mostly Japanese, who worked on that railroad for 7 years. And to me, that's a very extraordinary story. That was just part of her life, right? Then this next one, this is a kind of rail car that her kitchen was located in. They slept in those kinds of cars. Those are temporary railroad tracks there. And those people are not my grandparents, but of the era. Okay. This next one. Okay. My grandfather said, "There are not any Japanese here." And my grandmother said, "What do you mean? There's lots of Japanese here." He says, "Yeah, but they're all men and they're all kind of beat up, right? They're working on the railroad." we need to go down where there's more Japanese people. He says, where's that? He says, that's down there in Terminal Island in Long Beach. Because they have the canneries back there and the fishermen, et cetera, et cetera. So they went down there, and my grandmother and um, her stepdaughter and several other people, including my grandfather, got to work at the canneries. And the whole purpose was not to stay there at the canneries, because it was not very friendly work. It was tough work. Was to raise money. And they gained some money together, and they used it to go to start a grocery store in downtown Los Angeles. And that's what they end up doing. Well, that grocery store lasted up until the Depression. And then everyone had a hard time. And what are we doing? We're going back. Oh, there, okay. So the grocery store went under. In fact, her family was eating stuff off the shelves of the grocery store. There's nothing left in the grocery store, right? And so one of her stepdaughters had married a farmer, and he had leased a plot of land. And he says, well, she was trying to get work. Now, this is during the Depression, I believe. All right. And her husband, Kazuichi, had already died. So she's a widow with 6 kids and stepdaughter. And they're afraid that like they're going to starve, right? And so she knows how to farm and stuff. So she goes to work for her son-in-law, and he pays her $1 a day to work from dawn to dusk. Okay. And she does this. And all the vegetables she can eat. So I remember my father not liking the sight of vegetables, growing up. Anyway, so. Okay. This is my grandmother. I figured out she's around mid-70s at this point. So a lot of time has passed. And that's my oldest son. And just to give you a perspective on that, he's going to be 55 this year. Okay. So this is a long time ago. You can see that she's very strong, fit looking at mid-70s. She lived for another until age 91. So she continued to somehow hang in there. And there's one more slide that I wanted to show you. Is this one? Whoops. What happened here? Okay. This is a slide, and you can see I used to be pretty good looking. I'm right there on the end. And I think I'm 5 years old. This is in 1950, after the wars. So I was born in Manzanar. My sister, Hatsumi Kathy, next to me, was also born in Manzanar. The girl next to her is Harumi Ellis, who was also born in Manzanar. And then her sister, Anne, and then our younger sister, Noreen, who has since passed away. So actually, that particular picture means a lot to me, because there are so many things at play here, and Harumi was really, really smart. I'm talking quick, and she was so funny, and she built these models. I thought, wow, how can you do that? Anyway, she had a bad heart even from she was born. It was a congenital condition. And so they went to the Mayo Clinic, and they performed open heart surgery, and she was iced to reduce her body temperature and all. And she died on the operating table. And she was only 14. Sorry. Well, anyway, that was the first time I experienced any kind of death to somebody close to me, and it was not a great feeling. Oh. So anyway, this place where we're sitting is at the farmhouse, and Nomura Bachan was part of that family, and that's where she lived. And she kind of lived in that kind of circumstance for most of the rest of her life, because I think she was most comfortable there. Okay, well,
Thank you. So that gives us an introduction to Mizuko and her kind of life trajectory. And we wanted to ask you to read from your book, which
okay.
is like,
Hey, I made a couple of selections from the book. I've I've done it in larger print for
okay.
my own purposes here. They're both relatively short. You have to forgive me. I'm not a very good reader, but supposedly I wrote this. Okay, it's in chapter 8, and the title is 1911 America. This is when they got off that steamboat that I showed you that picture of, all right? And on July 27th, 1911, after 20 days at sea, Mizuko took her first step onto American soil. The landing party of Japanese alien passengers numbered only 9. So Mizuko's stay in the dockside immigration detention center was relatively short. There were brief physical exams, including examination of their stool for intestinal worms. Everyone's luggage was fumigated to kill lice and other vermin, and then the passengers from Japan were released into the bright light of a clear summer day in Tacoma, Washington. Long-awaited meetings between picture brides and their expected husbands took place. The group members bade each other goodbyes and good fortune, and then quickly left the dock in various private cars and cabs. Mizuko and Kazuichi were the only passengers left awaiting transport. After an interminable wait, a decrepit wooden wagon drawn by a dirty black gelding pulled up to the curb. The driver, a short, sturdy, young Japanese man, dressed in a sweat-stained black suit and bowler hat, leapt from the seat and bowed low to Kazuichi. Please forgive me for keeping you waiting, Nomura-san, he apologized. The horse ran off when I tried to harness it, and it took some time to catch it. Bakatare, idiot! Kazuichi barked, displaying the mercurial temper that Mizuko had come to know well. Hayaku, hurry! Kazuichi snarled as he thrust his luggage at the still bowing younger man. Kazuichi climbed up onto the wagon seat, sat down, and folded his arms. Mizuko took a step forward, and the driver, his face flushing red, bowed self-consciously and hurried to load her baggage into the bed of the truck. Turning back to Mizuko, he seemed at a loss as to what to do next. Mizuko made an attempt to climb into the back of the wagon, but was stymied by the constricted nature of her kimono. After some efforts by the young man to assist her, an irritated Kazuichi jumped off his seat onto the ground and hoisted his wife into the back of the wagon as she was no more than a sack of potatoes. Back on the wagon, he grunted to the driver to proceed. The young man snapped the reins down on the back of the horse, who swiveled his head around and glared back at his handler. Only after a lengthy pause did the horse turn and forward. Mizuko tried to arrange her kimono to avoid the lumps of dirt around her. Her embarrassment at being transported in such a primitive fashion was soon replaced by her fascination with the alien sights of Tacoma. Multi-storied, squared-off buildings, many appearing freshly built, crowded the road. As they made their way down the main street, she marveled at the number of cars, trucks, and streetcars roaming past them, far outnumbering the few horse-drawn wagons present. The largest buildings were constructed of brick and stone and dwarfed the structures of far away Art Nomura. Furthermore, aside from their fellow Japanese immigrants and a few laborers unloading cargo, everyone she saw was white and tall. Almost all the men they passed on the wooden sidewalks lining the street stood at least a half head taller than she. Many of those she stared at tipped their hat in her direction. Flustered by the attention, she lowered her eyes whenever it happened, but she was nonetheless pleased. That simple gesture made her think, America is a very different place than Japan, where women are seldom acknowledged by men. That is the excerpt from chapter 8. And go ahead. Yeah.
So let's see. So I was wanting to ask about sort of the process. You kind of chose a narrative style, and I really appreciate like the dialogue and kind of the picture that you paint. It's really wonderful. And so the scenes really come to life. So how much of that was imagined? Did that come from research? Did it come from your grandmother's stories? Just kind of how was that created?
It's a combination of things. You know, as I told you, in her early life, there wasn't much documentations. I have family photos, but Mizuko was not present, right? She didn't like being photographed. And so I don't have that. And so I did a lot of research from different books about Japanese American and immigration and so forth. And some folks are pretty thorough about it, and you can find out all that. In the back of the book, I believe there's a bibliography with a number of authors. I would recommend that if you're further interested in this subject. But, you know, things like the dialogue between folks. I thought, well, what would a person say in this situation? And what would be the main concern? And how am I going to keep this story moving forward? Because she told me many stories, but they weren't connected. There was one story here, one story over there, one story over here. And not only was it her, but it was also her children. My father was a wonderful storyteller. The problem was he exaggerated a lot, right? And so you didn't know if that was really the truth or, and then my Auntie Ako, who hopefully has gone online, she was a wonderful source of information, you know, because she saw it from a different perspective. And then my Aunt Yosh, who passed away a couple of years ago at age 100, she gave me information, and she had to work like a dog. I mean, really, to kind of keep the family together while Mizuko was in the fields, right? So, and my uncle Carl, we're gonna play a clip of his, was kind of like the opposite of my father. My father, like I told you, he only went to 8th grade in it because of circumstances. My my uncle, Carl, who's the third of the boys, had a PhD in mathematics. And he was a hugely articulate man. And I mistakenly went to him for advice now and then, but it's not like he wouldn't talk to me. He was a man of very few words, right? And let's face it, he was a bit full of himself. But anyway, I looked up to him, and so I shot a clip of him, and you're going to see shortly. And he talks about musical.
Should we play that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a great mother. Um, she told us all kinds of stories about gaman, patience, persistence, education, honesty, kindness, and one of the things she taught me was that if you have a good idea, use it. If you don't use it, you'll keep thinking about that one idea and you won't get new ones. So her advice is, if you have a good idea, use it, give it away, sell it, or throw it away.
When would she find the time to tell you these things? Well, when did these things, this passing on to
At the end of the day.
Mhm.
This happened when we were all pretty young. She didn't tell us very many stories during the Depression years because we were too busy trying to make a living.
This is something that I shot with him back in 2013. And he died 2 years later at age 93. So there's only one of the Nomura kids still alive, and that's my auntie Ayako, who we hope to see this summer. But anyway, so that's our group. And now I'm going to read an excerpt, the second excerpt. And this one is from chapter 20. And the reason why I chose these excerpts is there's a lot of stuff about Manzanar, and there's something like 5 chapters in the book about Manzanar. And so there's plenty of stuff on Manzanar, but there's not too much on the time before or the time after, right? So this is from immediately after. After much discussion, Mizuko, Sam's father, Kinzaburo, Hasegawa, and Yoshiko decided that their first post-camp move should not be to Southern California, but to the farmlands of Idaho, where employment and housing were guaranteed to be available. On May 2nd, 1945, during the gap in the incessant Manzanar dust storms, Mizuko, accompanied by her 2 daughters, Ayako and Yoshiko, with baby Harumi and her 15-year-old son, Jimmy, along with Kinzaburo, left Block 15 that had been their home for over 3 years. Each received a relocation allowance of $25 and a one-way ticket from the War Relocation Authority with which to begin their new lives. Rather than joining them on their trip, Mizuko's oldest son, Henry, opted to remain in Manzanar with his family because Mizuko was pregnant again and expecting their second child, which was me. Bikako's mother, Hatsu, also remained in Manzanar to help care for her daughter and 2-year-old granddaughter, Hatsumi. Mizuko and the contingent journeyed to Idaho via trains packed with uniformed GIs. Recently discharged from the service are traveling to reassignment in the Pacific. Unexpectedly, despite their initial fears of prejudice and discrimination along the way, Mizuko and her family found that most Japanese, including the military, treated them fairly. In fact, the majority of the soldiers were friendly and welcoming, often offering their seats to women of the group in the most crowded train. On their way north, the group heard of work in Layton, Utah, and decided to stop there to help bring in the just ripening green bean harvest. Teenage Jimmy, however, made the decision to continue on to Idaho alone to earn more money thinning sugar beets. In Europe, it was clear that the war was nearly won, with daily reports of Allied and Soviet victories and mounting German casualties. On May 8th, VE Day, Germany unconditionally surrendered, while the rest of America celebrated May 8th. In Layton, Utah, was just another day in the fields. The Nomura Hasagawas worked throughout the spring and early summer, harvesting and packing green beans. Compared to the dry, broiling heat of Manzanar, the weather in Utah was hot and humid. Mizuko's quick hands enabled her to meet her work quota without any trouble. During the long, tedious days, Mizuko thought often of her father and siblings in war-torn Japan. With the conflict raging, the correspondence between them had ground to a halt, and she knew nothing of their latest circumstances. The summer of 1945 found Japan ravaged by wave after wave of American bombers. On August 6th, with the Japanese on the brink of capitulation, the United States unleashed the deadliest single weapon in the history of warfare. The Enola Gay, an especially modified B-29 bomber, dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. The news of the A-bomb attack spread through the Mizuko's farming camp like wildfire. The packing shed where the family had been assigned to work was abuzz with anxious talk about what had occurred. They say that Hiroshima has been destroyed, said Kinzaburo. Those bastards killed thousands of helpless people, and for what? He continued angrily. The Japanese were already done for. Why drop such a bomb? Nakashima's son, field hand, ran up to the parking shed and addressed everyone. It's even worse than they're saying, he said breathlessly. The bomb blast was just the tip of the iceberg. I heard that something called radiation poisoning is going to kill a lot more people. Suddenly aware of the utter silence in the room, he said hesitantly, "Excuse me, but do any of you have any family out that way?" Largest group of Japanese immigrants had either come from Hiroshima province or had been born to parents who called it home. As they waited for an answer, it was clear to him from the group's faces that the answer to his query was yes. Mama's family is in Onorimura in Hiroshima, Ken. We pray that all of them are okay, said Yoshiko. Nakashima-san, regretful that he had asked, bowed awkwardly and looked down at his feet. Mizuko considered the sober faces around her and shook her head. Motanai ne. What a waste. War is a curse. Nothing good ever comes of it. She gazed at the assembled group for a moment, then returned to the task of packing green beans into their modern wooden shipping containers. But the rest of the week, the usual restorative effects of steady work could not curtail the feelings of sadness and trepidation that engulfed her. Though Mizuko's homeland of Onorimura, 45 miles from ground zero, was spared, Tens of thousands of Japanese civilians died or were injured by the sarin blast in Hiroshima municipal area. Afterwards, many others succumbed to radiation and other maladies caused by nuclear radiation from the blast. On August 14th, 1945, after a second atomic bomb from the United States had devastated the southern port city of Nagasaki, Japanese surrendered, ended World War II. While America widely celebrated the end of World War conflict, it had little effect on the fortunes of the displaced Nomura's Nakagawas. Despite the sadness they felt for their brethren in Japan, they continued their low-paying, strenuous work as farm laborers without pause. When the bean harvest ended in Utah, the families moved on to Weiser, Idaho, to join the ranks of migrant farm workers engaged in the apple harvest. So that is an excerpt from chapter 20.
Mm.
Let's see, where are we now?
Well, thank you for that. It's beautifully written. I often wonder how the Issei and Nisei felt hearing about the bombing, right? And so many are from Hiroshima. So
Yeah, well, she had experienced so much, so many bad things in her life that this was tragic. This was monumental, but to, I guess, to react too overly emotionally about something, I don't know if she could have taken it. She might have just broken down, but she couldn't do that because she had all these kids and everything she was responsible for. So she held it together. And that's why I use the word gaman, because the gaman doesn't have a literal English translation, but it roughly means persistence, hanging in there, that kind of a thing. And that's what she had. She had gaman. And she preached that, you heard Carl say that when he recalled her. She actually told stories about that. So I can't imagine.
So a couple more thoughts from you, and then we'll open up to Q&A. But how has your grandmother influenced your life? I think you talked a little bit about it in the beginning.
Well, she's influenced me in many ways, some of which I've been very slow to realize. Okay. But, I've had the privilege of my intelligence and my obsessive nature and my creativity, and I can hopefully influence others positively. All right. But I learned from early age that it's important to live your life with gaman, like Mizuko. And so, the way that she dealt with innumerable setbacks and obstacles and faced her responsibilities with an unparalleled work ethic and humor and grace really, really influenced me. I mean, it's a hard thing to live up to, but I've tried to, So I guess that's the main thing that influenced me.
Mhm. And for all of us as readers of this book, which I'm sure many will be purchasing today, what would you hope our takeaway is?
Well, I guess I would like you to remember that word gaman, okay? Because in our pampered world, it's becoming sort of a fleeting quality. People are not willing to hang in there, too impatient, they're too spoiled, whatever, all right? Things are too easy. But really, if there's something that you think is important, then you should put the effort to do it, because it's worth it. The other thing is, I wanted to say something about most of the people in this room are elderly, which I applaud, but because I'm one of you. But the thing is, both in American society and Japanese society, there isn't a tendency to record what has gone before. I mean, I've asked numerous people in Japan, do you know anything about your past? And I says, well, we know our grandparents. That was it. They didn't know that. And of course, they had traumatic experience in World War II. They lost huge numbers of people and cities and structures, and they sort of had to reinvent themselves. So I don't blame them that much. In the U.S., we had different wars. They're catastrophic. We had, our parents experienced the Depression, catastrophic. We're experiencing something now that I'm hoping is not catastrophic, but maybe it will be. I think it's important to pass on what you know and what you've experienced to those that are to your children and to your children's children. And sometimes they don't want to hear it. All right. Okay. But all right. Have a little gaman, will you? All right. So because what happens is I realize that once I pass, everything that I know is gone. And that's partly the reason why I do these documentaries, not because I'm such an egomaniac, but because I think I have interesting things to say and that maybe other people can benefit from them. So I guess that's a takeaway. And, my grandmother, I didn't say this earlier, but she was promised very early on when they were still in the chips that when she got older, she could be a doctor. Well, it was a big thing in Japan. Well, it's a big thing anywhere to have a woman doctor, but they had the means to kind of make that happen. But then they lost their fortune and they lost the means. And so she studied really hard. She was like the top of her class, which is not an easy thing in Japan. And she still practiced her kanji to an old age. I'm talking about thousands of figures of Japanese writing. She was very sharp that way. And it just didn't happen for her. But she passed on that sense of gaman, I think, to a lot of her subsequent generations. And I'm hoping that that continues to be true. And I'm hoping that for your families as well, that you can pass on some of those things, hopefully positive, to them, and so that they can carry that forth. So otherwise, there's, everyone kind of has to reinvent themselves. And reinvention is usually not that good because we can see people making the same damn mistakes over and over again. All right, so let's share the knowledge and we share the wisdom, and it's up to you to figure out the best way to do that. But I think it can be done. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So we'd love to hear from our audience. And Hatsumi's going to help us pass the mic around. So if someone would like to ask a question or share a comment, we'd be happy to hear from you. Oh, yeah, you need a mic so that people online can hear you.
On one of your sections on your website, you talk about the contrasting view of nature, Japanese versus Christian, living with it as opposed to conquering it. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how in your artistic work you represented that or thought about that.
Well, I think there's an incredible amount of waste in the world. And I think America is kind of leading the pack because we're blessed with so much. I mean, we have plenty of land, we have plenty of everything, right? Even though there are people that are, you know, unhoused and everything. I mean, we could clearly do that as a society. We don't do that. So, I mean, to me, it's kind of a sense of balance in a way that has to be restored, or has to be, at least you have to try to gain it. And one of the questions that keeps coming to mind is the number of people in the world. You know, when I was a kid, there was like 3 million people or 3 billion people on the planet. Now there's 8 billion people. I mean, this is in the course of my lifetime, right? And it's very hard to, at least in my mind, to retain old habits of doing things and keep any kind of balance. I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible. And so I think that the Japanese sensibility and the American sensibilities are different. In fact, I've remarked on this. You know, I've traveled extensively, so I've been in Europe many, many times, and I've been in Japan like half a dozen times. And so I've been able to experience the differences. And the Japanese are doing pretty well, but and what I always feel when I go there is that, okay, this is a different place. When I go to Europe, it doesn't feel that different from me, even though people speak different languages. It seems very familiar. When I go to Japan, especially the first time, I thought, well, this is a different place, okay? And it has to do with attitudes too, because Japanese are very concerned about group attitudes, and the US is obsessed with individualism, okay? And okay, if you have 1 million people, maybe you can be an individual. If you have 340 million people and they all want to be individuals, you have a big mess, right? I mean, people have to compromise and you have to look at the other person's point of view. But it's very hard to do if everyone's an individual and say, well, no, I don't think that. No, that doesn't seem right to me. And so we have all this conflict and difference of opinion. And that includes the environment and everything else about how we should be treating it, whether we should honor it, whether we should exploit it. You know, it just goes on and on and on. So it's a basic kind of trait of the two different places that is quite different. You know, I think about the school kids in Japan. They're tasked with cleaning their own school. All right. They actually have some time when they have to go and they have to clean and they have to wash the floors and all that from a very young age. And then when at the World Cup soccer in Japan was quite good at that year. And the Japanese fans stayed and they cleaned up the stands. I said, what the hell? You know, Americans, they're like throwing popcorn all over the goddamn place. You know, I mean, it's a whole different attitude. So I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong, but it's difficult to reconcile the environment with so many different opinions. And yeah, I don't know if I touched on your question or not. Okay.
Other questions or comments? Erica. Oh, in the mic. Oh. Yeah.
That's about the time on your whole life when you went back to Japan to study the returning Japanese people who were moving back to Japan. And you were going to look at the question of why did they do that?
Yes.
And do you think that it was primarily the lack of ability to be creative in the United States? Or was there any reason that actually stood out to you?
I don't know. Did you all hear the question? You understand the question? Okay.
Can you repeat it?
About who, what were the reasons why people moved back to Japan after they had established themselves here? And I cannot give a blanket answer because there were a lot of different reasons. One of the primary ones is they found love in Japan, and a lot of them got married to Japanese people. Okay. Another one is that what they were doing here wasn't working, and in there it did. There was opportunity. So you could attach that to creativity in a way because, we all, I think, if in our hearts of hearts are good at something or would like to be good at something, but there isn't a place for it in every place in the world. And I think they found that there as well. So, and I'll just relate an experience I had when I went to Japan for the first time. I look very Japanese, all right, but I am not. And I didn't fully realize it or appreciate it until I went to Japan. And I went out, we arrived in Tokyo, and it was very late at night. And I thought there's nobody going to be around. And so we went through this underground kind of passageway, and we came out of the main street in Tokyo, and there was lights everywhere, and there was thousands of people. And a lot of them looked like me. And I thought, whoa, this is a new feeling, I didn't stand out, even though I'm taller than the normal older Japanese, but I kind of felt like, okay, this is home. And I really liked that feeling because here, I'm with people that are used to Japanese faces and so forth. But if you go in other parts of the United States, no, you're going to be stared at best, So I thought, man, this is really great. But then I shortly discovered or realized that I'm not Japanese, that I don't think like them, that I don't physically behave like them, I'm not polite like them, okay? I'm American. And no matter what people say, where are you from? Where are you from? They always ask that question, where are you from? Well, I was born in Manzanar. Well, what the hell's Manzanar? Okay. I'd rather not tell people where I'm from. I mean, it gets really complicated. And I think every Japanese American in this room or Asian American knows it has a story of their own about trying to fit in with the main culture of the United States and figuring out ways to negotiate that and still be themselves. It's a challenge, and I think if you look different, it's going to be a challenge every day. But it becomes like almost like second nature. You don't have to think about it. You just do it, and you deal with people. And if you come across someone that's broad-minded or has been other places, then it's easy. But you run into people that are not, and it's not so easy. And anyway, so it's an ongoing issue. I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah.
We have another question comment here, Kathy, in the front row. Erica. No, I think you have to turn it on. Let's see. There we go.
Thanks. I really enjoyed your talk, Art. Full disclosure, I was a colleague. I had the honor of being a colleague of Art's at LMU in Los Angeles. I think you answered for me a question I've always had about the Japanese American experience with the concept of gaman. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. And that would be in essence persistence. Did I get that right, Art? Okay. Because I've often wondered, so my family is, as you know, on my mom's side, Punjabi, and came over in a similar time as your grandparents. I've often been struck by, I feel so angry on behalf of the Japanese American community personally, but I'm now whatever fourth generation and the privilege of not looking necessarily like a minority. I feel so angry about them of, why weren't the Germans picked up? Why weren't the Italians picked up? The Japanese Americans were imprisoned, right? Why were the A-bombs dropped on Japan twice when they were about to surrender? And I've been struck by, I don't see that anger exhibited by Japanese Americans. And I would just love to hear your thoughts about that. Because I know my family's pretty pissed off about what the British did in India. And we talk about it. And I was just curious, is it the essence of gaman to just keep your head down, work hard, try to do better for your kids? Or tell me more.
Well, I can't speak for my parents, but I can imagine the kind of life they led. And, I witnessed some incidences, but they stayed in the community often for a reason. And that was because they knew what to expect. And if they went into the greater community, they would run into broad-minded or thoughtful people, but just as easily they could run into someone that's quite bigoted. And so they stayed within their community to avoid that, I think. How could they handle that? Well, not happily, but they would not complain. The person in jail is not complaining to the jailer. The jailer's not going to do anything. Yeah, shut up, But they would complain to each other and say, so you probably haven't heard anybody bitch about this or that. But that feeling was there. We're really being treated unjustly and whatever. And, I guess the way to kind of deal with that is trying to go as far as they could economically, because we live in a capitalist country. And, if you got a good paying job, that was a form of saying, look, we're as good as you. We're probably better than you. I don't know. But, this is how I'm going to show you. If I get in a fist fight with you because I don't believe you, that doesn't get me anywhere, I know some people that are masterful at judo. They won't fight anybody. They could beat up people. They could kill people. They won't fight. They're pacifists, That's a kind of an extreme example. But, I don't think that violence is ever the answer. And I understand anger, but I don't know. I'm just looking around the room. I know there's all kinds of people. And if I live in Culver City, which is south of here, but there's a lot of open-minded people in this area that are curious about others and so forth. And I think that's great. You know, you're not gonna change the mind of everybody. Some people are just hardcore. And unfortunately, the loudest voices are often the one that's heard. And just as often, they're not the ones that you want to hear, right? So anyway, I think one has to be selective and not be triggered by stupidity, which is abundant as well. So
Thank you. Thank you for that. So we're going to close the formal portion of this talk. And I'm wondering do we know if the auntie is online? No, we don't. Okay. Okay. Well, we were hoping to say hello to Art's auntie. She was going to log on from where she's living, but we'll check with her later. But the book is on sale. Art and Hatsumi got copies for us, and they're $20 inclusive. So if you'd like to purchase them, you can go over there to the table, and we have refreshments. We'd love for you to stay and chat and, greet Art and Mary and the family. So please do that. Thank you so much, Art, for coming. And as I had wanted him to share some other things that he's done, a lot of his video work, but there was just too much to talk about. So maybe another time you can come visit your sister and we can have you again here at J-Sei. Thank you very much.
you're welcome.